Australia's first educational institution was opened in 1789, a year after the arrival of the First Fleet, and was run by 2 convicts. By 1797, that number had grown to 6 schools. Initially, the purpose of education was to cater for the children of the wealthy, many of whom employed governesses to educate their children at home or even sent them back to England to receive a proper education. In the early 1800s, no standard for education existed in Australia. Schools were attended solely by the children of the wealthy, where they were educated according to traditional British ideals which centred around the 3 R's: reading, writing and arithmetic. This philosophy continued until around the 1830s, when civil unrest prompted a rethinking of society's educational philosophy. You see, the first white settlers of Australia consisted largely of a criminal class, the convicts, and so by the 1830s the population consisted mainly of the children of this criminal class, all of whom lacked any sort of formal education due to the exclusivity of the current education system. It was decided that the high crime rate early Australian society was experiencing was due to ignorance, which was in turn due to lack of education. Therefore, the establishment of an education system which was accessible to all classes of people throughout society was primarily seen as necessary to control what was considered a young generation of criminals. It aimed to instill good morals and decent law-abiding behaviour so that an orderly and obedient society would emerge. At this time, school was not about developing the individual and preparing them for a life of limitless opportunity. It was about social control and preparing and assigning people to their place in society. It was considered that the child of a farmer need not learn much more than the skills required for farming. The child of a tailor need only learn what was necessary for them to become a successful tailor. And if your dad was a street sweeper, there was no need for you to fear that your potential in life would ever be overestimated by your educators. The 1872 Education Act saw the introduction of a free compulsory secular education system in Victoria for all children aged 6 to 13 years old. And by 1895, the rest of the settlements in Australia had followed suit. There was now a free public school system which was funded by the government, available to all children across Australia. Church-run religious schools were also still operating, however these were now self-funded and no longer received government assistance. At this time, the ideology of what should be taught in schools also expanded to include not only the 3 R's, but also singing and drawing, as well as sewing and cooking for female students. In the early 1900s, the philosophy behind how and what children were taught developed even further, and saw the introduction of new teaching techniques, as well as the further expansion of the curriculum to include new subjects such as nature study, poetry, science, drawing, and model making. By the 1950s, children were expected to stay in school until they were 15. In 1964, due to lobbying and the Catholic school strike, funding to religious schools was restored, initially in the form of grants to upgrade certain facilities and departments, but by the end of the 60s, governments were once again providing regular funding to non-government schools. By the early 80s, funding for non-government schools had surpassed that of government schools, and today the gap continues to widen. From its foundation, our education system was aimed at maintaining class structures in society. In private schools, affluent young ladies and gents were refined and prepared for a privileged role in society, while poor children enrolled in the public system were prepared for a future of domestic and manual work. Classes in either system were filled with endless direct instruction, and children were considered empty vessels, waiting to be filled with information. Satisfactory completion of school meant memorising and parroting a socially agreed upon curriculum of concepts and formulas. Education was about being taught what to think, rather than how or why to think. Schools emphasised the importance of order, neatness, thoroughness, discipline, and respect for authority. The 1973 Carmel Report saw the introduction of a national curriculum framework and national testing program. At the same time, the Whitlam Labor government of the 70s put an end to the centralised schooling system in Australia, placing more control in the hands of individual states and territories. This era in education endeavoured to develop a more grassroots approach to curriculum planning, assessment and certification by involving educators, parents and senior students in decision-making processes. Emphasis was also placed on equality of opportunity. For the first time in its short history, education in Australia was seen as a means to develop and prepare the individual for the opportunities that awaited them, rather than to simply slot them into their predetermined place in life. In 1987, Victoria stepped away from the national HSC accreditation for high school graduates and implemented a localised system, the Victorian Certificate of Education, or VCE. Throughout the 90s and into the early 2000s, states and territories each developed their own individual curriculums in line with national statements and profiles. Australia's modern-day philosophy on education, as outlined in a 2008 declaration made by the Ministerial Council on Education, Employment, Training and Youth Affairs, is that schools promote the intellectual, physical, social, emotional, moral, spiritual and aesthetic development and well-being of young Australians and ensure the nation's ongoing prosperity and social cohesion. With these new ideologies in place, it is clear that the role of the teacher has changed significantly in the last 200 years. Teachers are no longer considered fountains of undisputable knowledge and authority, there to fill students full of ready-made formulas and paradigms, like some kind of download. The role of the teacher has moved now to facilitator. A modern teacher will encourage, guide and inspire students with their inquiries, but teach them how and why to think, rather than telling them what to think. So what is the likely future direction of education in Australia based on current trends? The Melbourne Declaration on Educational Goals for Young Australians has identified two main areas of the education system which currently require improvement. Educational support for students from low socio-economic backgrounds and members of the Indigenous community, and increasing Year 12 retention rates across the entire spectrum of society. With regard to curriculum-based developments, the 2008 Declaration also emphasises the importance of young Australians becoming more Asia literate. Aspects of the curriculum which will engage and build stronger relationships with our economically powerful neighbours will be introduced or enhanced. This may occur linguistically with a push for Chinese load, but also will occur generally with cross-cultural content being introduced to broader aspects of the curriculum. Schools are also focusing on becoming more technology literate, with information and communications technology becoming increasingly incorporated into more and more facets of classwork and assessments. Being able to comfortably integrate technology into our everyday lives is already an integral part of functioning in modern society, and the future of the education system lies in ensuring that all young Australians are well equipped to flourish and prosper in a technologically advanced future.